All right. Ready to give your wardrobe a sustainable makeover? We're taking a deep dive into how the EU is tackling the environmental impact of what we wear.
We're talking about policies, innovations, maybe even a fashion revolution along the way.
I love it. I've got to admit, I never really thought about my t-shirts and jeans as like an environmental problem. It's just clothing, right?
It does seem that way, doesn't it? But the reality is the textile industry has a much bigger footprint than we might think. Did you know global textile production has practically doubled since 2000?
Doubled. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay, I know fast fashion has become a thing, but that's a crazy increase.
It really is. And that's a big reason why the EU is stepping in. They've got a plan to make the textile industry a lot more sustainable.
Yeah.
We're talking about a complete overhaul, how clothes are designed, produced, used, and even how we get rid of them in the end.
Wow. Okay. So where do we even start unpacking all of this? What makes the fashion industry such an environmental heavyweight?
Well, it boils down to resources and waste a huge amount of both. Think about it, all the water needed to grow cotton, the energy to make raw materials into fabrics, and then the whole manufacturing process to actually make the clothes. It really adds up.
Right, and then there's the whole problem of clothes just ending up in landfills. It feels like we're stuck in this cycle of buying trendy items that fall apart after a few washes, and then we just replace them with the next new thing.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate reality of fast fashion. The European Environment Agency estimates that a shocking 5.8 million tons of textiles are discarded every year just within the EU. That's about 11 kilos or 24 pounds per person.
You're kidding me? 24 pounds. That's like throwing out a suitcase full of clothes every single year.
So how is the EU tackling this fast fashion obsession?
They're really focused on something called eco-design. Basically, they're trying to incorporate sustainability right into the design process itself.
Eco-design. So it's more than just switching to organic cotton. It's about rethinking how clothes are made from the ground up. Exactly. Longer-lasting clothes, easy to repair, and designed to be recycled. And here's the interesting part. The European Commission found that a massive 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design stage.
80%. Wow. So choosing a durable fabric or even just adding an extra row of stitching can make that much of a difference.
Absolutely. A well-designed garment can have a much smaller footprint than something cheaply made, even if they look the same in the store.
That's incredible. But how does the EU plan to actually make eco-design the norm? Is this like a complete fashion industry makeover?
It's a huge shift for sure, and it'll require everyone to be on board: designers, manufacturers, retailers, even us as consumers.
Okay, so it's not just about telling designers to use different fabric, it's about changing the whole system.
Exactly. The EU is looking at legislation, economic incentives, and industry partnerships to make it happen. They want to make sustainable choices the more appealing option from every angle.
I'm all for incentives. It sounds like they're really trying to work with the fashion industry, not just against it. But let's get back to the environmental impact for a sec. I know fast fashion isn't great, but what else are they zeroing in on?
One big concern is microplastic pollution from synthetic textiles. It's kind of a hidden consequence of our love for fabrics like polyester.
Microplastics from my clothes. You're going to have to break this one down for me.
Think about it. Every time you wash your clothes, tiny fibers shed from the fabric. Those microscopic plastic particles, many of them are way too small to be caught by washing machines. They enter the water and eventually the food chain. And the numbers are pretty alarming.
All right, now you've got me really curious and a little freaked out. How bad is it?
Well, studies show that something like 40,000 tons of synthetic fibers are released into the water from washing machines each year. Again, that's just in the EU.
40,000 tons. That's like dumping a mountain of plastic into our water. I had no idea it was that much. What can we even do about something that small, but also so widespread?
The EU is tackling this from a few different angles, including, you guessed it, product design. They're encouraging the use of natural fibers, but also exploring regulations for things like washing machine filters.
Filters for washing machines. Okay, that's a practical solution I can get behind.
Right. It's a great example of how innovation can address even those really tiny challenges. And speaking of innovation, have you heard about the digital product passport for textiles? It could totally change the way we shop for clothes.
A passport for my clothes. Now, this sounds interesting. Tell me more.
Imagine you're shopping for a new shirt, and you can scan a tag that tells you its entire environmental story. How much water was used to make it, the dyes, whether it's recyclable, all of it.
Are you serious? It's like a nutrition label for clothes. I love this idea. It would let people like me make informed choices instead of falling for these vague, eco-friendly claims.
That's exactly the point. The digital passport is all about bringing much-needed transparency to the fashion industry.
Wow, a digital passport that shows me the real environmental cost of my clothes. That would be a game changer.
Totally. Transparency is key, not just for us as shoppers, but also for companies that are actually trying to make better choices.
I can only imagine how different things would be if we knew exactly what went into making our clothes.
It could have a huge impact, but it all depends on whether people use it and if companies adopt it widely.
That's true. It does come back to us, the shoppers. But honestly, it's so hard to resist the pull of fast fashion. It's everywhere, it's cheap, and there's always something new and tempting.
You're not wrong. The EU understands that. They know they can't just ignore how powerful the fast fashion industry is.
Okay, so what's the strategy then? How do you even begin to address that kind of fast fashion addiction?
Well, one thing they're doing is promoting alternatives. We're talking about things like clothing rental services, repair shops, even just supporting secondhand markets. They're pushing this idea of refashion now. It's all about quality and being mindful of what we buy.
Refashion now. I like it. It's catchy. But are people really going to choose a pre-loved sweater over the instant gratification of buying something brand new?
It's definitely a big change. But the EU is really putting their money where their mouth is on this. They're supporting these social enterprises that are all about giving old clothes new life. So we're seeing this rise in vintage shops, clothing libraries, repair cafes. It's becoming a thing.
Now, that's something I can get behind. It's not just about being environmentally conscious. It's about supporting local communities and creating jobs.
Absolutely. And according to the EU Commission, the potential for job creation in this area is huge. Just imagine a world where throwing clothes away is the last resort and giving those pre-loved garments a new life is totally normal.
That's a future I want to be a part of. But honestly, with all this talk about sustainable fashion, it's easy to get lost in all these eco-friendly claims. How are we as shoppers supposed to know what's genuine and what's just greenwashing?
You're right to be cautious. It's like a minefield of buzzwords and vague claims out there. Eco-friendly, consciously crafted, made with recycled materials. It's really hard to know what's real.
It's true. It can feel overwhelming. It's like, I need a degree in textile production just to buy a t-shirt. How is the EU addressing this problem of misleading sustainability claims, especially when it comes to things like recycled materials?
They're cracking down on misleading green claims in a big way. One of their main tools is something called the Green Claims Initiative.
Okay, so tell me more about this Green Claims Initiative. How's it going to actually work?
Basically, it's going to lay out very specific rules for what companies can and can't say about their products. No more vague terms or misleading language. They want clear, verifiable evidence for any environmental claim being made.
Now that's what I'm talking about. It sounds like they're serious about making sure brands are accountable for what they say. But let's zoom out for a second. Fashion is a global industry. How can the EU really make a difference when so much of the production happens outside of their borders?
That's a really important point, and the EU knows it. They realize they can't just focus on what's happening within their own borders.
So they're taking their sustainability mission global. How does that even work?
They're using their influence in international trade and diplomacy. So through trade agreements, they're pushing for stricter environmental and labor standards in the textile industry. And they're working with organizations like the United Nations to make it happen.
So it's about setting a good example, aiming high, and hoping other countries follow their lead.
Exactly. They're also promoting these sustainable textile value chains through big international forums like the G7 and the G20. They've got a multi-pronged strategy to try to drive positive change across the globe.
That's good to hear. They're really thinking about the bigger picture. You mentioned something earlier called the transition pathway for the textiles ecosystem. What exactly is that, and how does it fit into their overall strategy?
Think of it as their roadmap to a greener fashion industry in the EU by 2030.
2030, that's coming up fast. So what's on this roadmap?
It lays out all the steps they need to take to make the EU's textile industry more sustainable, resilient, and digitally advanced. It really stresses a collaborative approach, so bringing together people from across the industry, policymakers, researchers, even consumers, to come up with solutions together.
So it's not just about telling the fashion industry what to do, it's about working together to find the best solutions.
Exactly. It's about fostering this sense of shared responsibility and encouraging innovation within the industry.
But a transformation this big is bound to have its challenges, right? What are some of the hurdles they're anticipating as they try to make this vision a reality?
Well, for one thing, they need to make sure smaller businesses don't get left behind in all of this.
Right, because they might not have the resources to keep up with these new standards and all this new tech as quickly as the bigger companies can.
Exactly.
Right.
Luckily, the EU knows that and is planning to offer some specific help. Things like funding opportunities, helping share knowledge, and programs to build up their capacity, all designed to help those smaller businesses thrive.
That's great. But even with help, switching to a more sustainable model usually means investing more money. How are they dealing with that side of things?
That's another really important point. You're right, sustainability can be expensive, especially in the short term. But the EU sees this as a true investment, not just in the environment, but in helping their textile industry stay competitive in the long run.
So they're playing the long game, figuring that putting money into sustainable practices now will pay off down the line.
Exactly. And to back that up, they're putting some serious funding behind it. We're talking about programs like Horizon Europe, LIFE, and the European Regional Development Fund, all focused on boosting sustainability in textiles.
Wow, they're really putting their money where their mouth is. But it's not just about public funding, though, is it?
You got it. The EU also knows how much power the private sector has. They're going all in on attracting private investment for sustainable textile projects
How are they doing that?
by coming up with clear standards for what counts as a sustainable investment in this industry. It's all about making sustainability make sense financially.
Smart. Create a win-win, good for the planet, good for business. But even with the funding and everything else, we still need skilled workers to make this happen. Is there any concern about having enough people who actually know how to do this stuff?
That's definitely something to think about. The skills you need for a greener fashion industry are changing so fast. It's not just about sewing anymore.
Now you need to know about sustainable design, circular manufacturing, digital technologies. It's a lot.
Exactly. It's a whole new world.
So how are they hoping to close that skills gap?
Education and training are key here. The EU is putting a lot of resources into programs like the Pact for Skills to get the workforce ready. Think apprenticeships, upskilling programs, partnerships between companies and schools, all with the goal of building a workforce that's prepared for the future.
It's awesome that they're not just focused on the environmental and economic parts of this, but also on the social impact, making the industry better for the people involved, too.
For sure. And they're even looking specifically at getting more women into leadership roles within the textile industry.
Because we need those diverse perspectives to build a truly sustainable future, right?
Absolutely. You can't have one without the other. It's really encouraging to see such a comprehensive approach. But in the end, so much of this comes down to us, the people who buy the clothes.
So we can't just sit back and wait for the industry to change itself. We need to think about why we buy the clothes we do.
100%. Every time we buy something, it's like we're voting for the kind of world we want. So we have to ask ourselves, how was this made? What's the environmental impact? Could I get it repaired or resell it later on? It's about really embracing that idea of refashion now, but in our own lives.
It's about changing how we think. Instead of always wanting the newest thing, we need to start appreciating quality and long-lasting clothes.
Exactly. And that change in mindset, that's what's really going to revolutionize the fashion industry.
That's a really powerful thought. We all have a part to play in making fashion more sustainable for the planet and for everyone. This has been a fascinating deep dive into what the EU is doing to make the fashion industry greener. It gives me so much hope.
It reminds us that the future of fashion isn't just about what we wear, but how we wear it. So stay curious, ask the important questions, and make those conscious choices. That's how we make a real difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's a wrap on our deep dive into the future of sustainable fashion. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making a difference.